الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على النبي المصطفى الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات. أما بعد, dear brothers and sisters, inshallah tonight we are resuming our speech about our beloved Palestine or Palestine. It's the topic of today and every day. Today we are going to actually start our first session talking about the modern history of Palestine. The modern history and the point of history that I chose to start from is the 18th century. Saying that, I want to state some facts tonight. The first fact about the history is, for the last 2,000 years, before the beginning of the 19th century, or in the middle of the 19th century, we are talking about there is no existence to the Jewish people in Palestine, in the meaning of ruling or even dominating as their population, for example. We have seen in the year 1840, it's stated that the Jewish population in Palestine were no more than 6,000 people. That's it. So the dominant population of Palestine by that time, that before and after almost around the year 1840, was dominant, or the place was dominant by the Muslims and the Christians. And of course, the majority, of course, were the Muslims. But the Jewish people were no more than 6,000 people. The statistics say that. Palestine was existing. There was something called Palestine. And if you do not believe me, go back to the declaration of Balfour that gave that promise of this land, or promised this piece of land to the Jewish people. It says, given what? The land of what? Palestine. There were no Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, yes, I agree. But Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine was existing with these names. Iraq was existing with these names. This is another fact. I say that, and we want to actually recall some important organizations with the modern history of Palestine. Unfortunately, the first organization we're going to talk about in this history is the Zionist movement, Zionism, and the Usbatul Umam. Some countries are going to be involved when we are talking about the history, the modern history of Palestine. We will start with the Ottoman Empire, which was ruling Palestine at that time for centuries. So when those Jewish people came to reside in Palestine, it was under the ruling of the Ottoman Empire. And there are also, we are going to mention the Great Britain. We are going to talk about France, and we will come to the agreement of Sykes-Picot. This is the very famous part of the division of this piece of land in the Arab world. Then we will talk about some great events. We will start actually with the killing of Alexander II, Al-Qaisar of Russia. And we are going to go to talk about Balfour Declaration. We will come to talk about the First World War and the Second World War. All of these events are going to actually come together to explain the dilemma of losing our beloved Palestine. Some names are going to be very famous with us. From the Jewish people, we are going to remember and talk a lot about Theodor Herzl, who started, or he is the key figure that we know about Zionism. He's not actually the first, and he was not the last. He was not the one who established that movement, actually not. So we're gonna explain that. We're gonna talk about Al-Sharif Al-Hussein, the ruler of Al-Hijaz, of the holy cities in Mecca. We are going to talk about places like Egypt and the Suez Canal. At that time, by the way, the way to dominate the area, and this was a reason of the British people. Why did they were interested to keep Palestine under their control? Was not the oil. Oil was not existing yet. It was because of the Suez Canal. We're going to explain that. And at the same time, there are many things to talk about the modern history of Palestine. But the beginning, as I say, let's start from the 18th century. And we said, starting from 1840, we have seen the population of the Jewish people in Palestine, in Palestine that did not exceed 60,000 people. The surprise is that by the time Balfour Declaration was announced, almost 60,000 Jewish people moved to live in Palestine. Even before they got what? The Declaration of Balfour. 60,000 people in almost 7 years. I say this because I'm going to compare between the Zionism movement and our actions in the Arab and the Muslim world, which was led by Sharif Hussein. So the movement of Zionism were working, and they were working tirelessly. And what I want to say, Leon Pennisker actually started the idea of the political Zionist movement. And we are always introducing Zionism as a political movement, which is actually, I want to say today, this is not right. This is not fully right. Why? Because when Zionism started in Europe, we have to understand that the Jewish people were oppressed. And many, if not all, of the nations and the governments of the states they lived in were actually in great hatred to them. So there are some kind of Zionism movement that started. Actually, one of the establishers and the founders of this is this Leon Pennisker. He was a Russian physician. And he started this idea of political Zionism to have a sovereign state for the Jewish people, regardless was it Palestine or not. But he started this. So actually it was not started by Theodor Herzl. Then they have other social movements that they were talking about. We have that kind of communal society of the Jewish people. And this is how they started the first kibbutz. Is that right? Am I saying it right? Does anyone know? Kibbutz. They call it now in Palestine. So this is a social movement. They said that we want to make our own community to establish the Jewish community. So we have to have a kind of settlement. We have to have a kind of community, physical community, living together, getting Judaism to act like this. There was also a kind of cultural Zionist group. They were talking about, actually, the idea of we want to revive the Hebrew language and the Jewish tradition and the history. Yes. And actually, the one who founded that idea published a book called This Is Not the Way. He wanted to revive, first he said that, let's revive the Hebrew language and the Jewish history and the culture. So this is cultural, this is social movement, cultural movement, political movement. And actually, what happened is Theodor Herzl came to make all of these movements of Zionism come together. This is what Herzl did when he came and he published his book, The Jewish State. And by the way, he passed away in 1904, and he did not witness even Balfour Declaration. And these are lessons we want to learn from them, actually, how this man was working. And by the way, before he died, he visited the Ottoman Empire, and he visited Sultan Abdul Hamid al-Thani 5 times, trying to convince him to take that land of Palestine for the Jewish people. So what I want to say today very quickly is, while the Jewish people everywhere in the entire world, specifically in Europe, was working tirelessly, planning to move to Palestine, we were in the Arab world fighting with one another, and we were plotting or making that kind of revolt against the Ottoman Empire under the name of what? The Arab nation. While they were working to do that. And those people all came together to have their first Congress or any kind of meeting in almost 1897, led by Herzl. And by the way, until that moment, they were still fighting. Is it political state, or is it cultural Zionism, or is it social Zionism? And they were still fighting even in this. But they came together to one agreement that they wanted to establish their political state in Palestine, and everyone agreed to come to the main goal and achieve the main target, which is what? Let's go to Palestine first, and all of these movements of Zionism are going to be integrated in one thing. And by the way, I want to finish saying what? Also, at the same time, I forgot to say, there was a movement that can be described or has been already described as religious Zionism. It was led by 2 rabbis. It's the idea of getting back to the state and establishing something like the temple. Okay, so there was many types of Zionism, and they ended up to just start their state, which, as I said, they managed to move almost 60,000 people even before 1917. It's the year when Balfour Declaration was announced. I just want to say one thing to finish this night, saying what? The first wave of immigration of the Jewish people came from Russia, not from Europe. And it started actually, the first phase, historically, we call it between 1882 and 1904. 20,000 people moved from Russia to settle in Palestine, secretly. No one knows anything about that. Who started this? Just going back to that Leon Pennesker, if you remember that name, this is the 3rd time to mention him, he actually established a movement or a group of people called Lovers of Zion, أحباء صهيون. This group of lovers of Zion, they were facilitating these waves of immigration from Russia, first of all, and after that from Europe to Palestine. The first wave of migration started in the year 1882 after the murder of Alexander II, who was the Caesar of Russia. And after that, the group of lovers of Zion started preparing people, and they managed to take or move 20,000 Jewish people from Russia to settle in Palestine without anyone knowing anything about anything of that. This is just the beginning of the modern history of Palestine. We are going to start, inshallah, from now on, and we will continue explaining everything about that from the Jewish side and from our side, from their success and from our failure. They're uniting or being united together, and for us being divided. So that was actually one of the main reasons that we lost our beloved Palestine, as it was lost, or as we lost Spain before, or Al-Andalus. But unfortunately, we did not learn. And hopefully we will learn the lesson one day. اللهم انصر إخواننا في فلسطين يا رب العالمين، اللهم انصرهم نصرا عزيزا مؤزرا، اللهم أيدهم بجندك يا رب العالمين، اللهم اجعل الدائرة تدور على أعدائهم بحولك وقوتك يا رب العالمين، اللهم احقن دماءهم يا أكرم الأكرمين، اللهم احقن دماءهم يا رب العالمين، اللهم احقن دماءهم يا أكرم الأكرمين، واجعل ذلك عاجلا غير آجل يا رب العالمين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلاة وسلاما على المرسلين، وجزاكم الله خيرا.